Hello, students. So, in today's session, we are going to discuss about LPG, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So, in your previous session, we discussed about the economic environment in India. So, what was the economic environment? So, what was the situation of India? So, what are the changes that took place in the economic environment of India? So, I was telling you about the situation or the position of India before 1991. I told you that India or Indian economy was concentrating mainly on agriculture, and also I told you that the people of India had a rural character. That is, most of the people were from rural area. So apart from that, I told you that somewhere around 70% of working population of India was working as farmers, that is totally agriculturist. Okay, so 70% of the working population was employed in agriculture. That is 70% of the total population of India was under the agriculture, or they carried out agriculture as their main occupation. And somewhere around 85% of the population of India, or 85% of population of India was from a rural area, that is from villages. So apart from that, when there is 70% of people working under or as agriculturists, and when 85% of population is living in village area, then what happens is, like, that the production which was carried out by these people were totally irrational. Yes, so they didn't carry out a sophisticated what a method of production. Yeah, the production were totally irrational. Then the technology was also a low productive technology, that is less productive technology, outdated technology, or very old technology were used by the people who were carrying out production. So production activity was totally outdated, or less productivity technology was used here. So apart from that, when coming to the health, so communicable diseases were totally widespread. So mortality rates were totally high. When communicable diseases were widespread, the mortality rates were totally high, and there was no good public health system. So in order to solve these economic problems of our country, government, what it did is, it took several steps, including control by the state of certain industries, then central planning, and reduce importance of the private sector. So the objective of these were initiate a rapid economic growth to raise the standard of living. So how to raise the standard of living is to increase the employment, totally to reduce unemployment and to reduce poverty. So when the unemployment is reduced, or the poverty is reduced, or when the people gets employed, yeah, then the amount of poverty reduces. That in turn, it helps to increase the standard of living of the country. So standard of living of the country totally increases or improves. Okay, so apart from that, the country wanted to become a self-reliant and set up strong industrial base. Yeah, it wanted to be self-reliant and wanted to conduct its activity, or it had to set up a strong industrial base. Okay, so after that, it was like it wanted to reduce the inequalities of income and wealth. So ಏನು inequalities ಇತ್ತು, income ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, wealth ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇರ್ಬೋದು. So that was totally reduced. So the fourth one was like adopting the socialist pattern. Yeah, socialist pattern of development based on equality and prevent exploitation of men by men. So when there is no equality between the human beings, yes, so what happens, then there are chances that one may exploit the other, that is one man may exploit the other, inequality will take place. So they wanted the socialist pattern of development. So in accordance with the economic planning, what the government did is, the government gave a lead role to public sector. So So public sector was given with a leading role for infrastructure industry, where public sector concentrated on infrastructure industry. So when public sector concentrated or was given a lead role to carry on with infrastructure industry, what happened is, like, the private sector was broadly given the responsibility of developing the consumer goods industry. So the control of the consumer goods industry was totally given to the private sector. Okay, so at the same time, what the government did is, the government, it imposed several restrictions, regulations, and controls on working of private sector enterprises. It imposed certain restrictions or controls on the working of private sector. Okay, so in 1991, what happened is that the economy faced a serious foreign exchange crisis. So it had come across the financial crisis. So high government deficit and also rising trend of prices was a main problem. Okay, so as a part of economic reforms of 1991, the government of India, it announced the new industrial policy in July 1991. It introduced, or it announced the new industrial policy in 1991. So the policy or the features of this policy were that the government, what it did is, it reduced the number of industries under compulsory licensing to 6. So earlier the government had more industries under it which needed to have compulsory licensing. So what the government did is reduce the number of industries under compulsory licensing to 6. So the second main feature of this industrial policy was that many of the industries reserved for public sector under the earlier policy. Many of the industries reserved for public sector under the earlier policy were de-reserved. So it was de-reserved. The role of public sector was limited only to 4 industries of strategic importance. So what they did is, they totally de-reserved the reservations which was in the earlier policy, and the role of public sector was limited only to 4 industries of strategic importance. So after that, the third feature was that disinvestment was carried out in case of many public sector enterprises. So they started to take out their investment. So disinvestment was totally stopped, or it was totally encouraged or carried out in case of many public sector enterprises. So policy towards foreign capital was totally liberalized. So the huge restrictions or heavy restrictions when coming to the policies towards foreign capital was totally liberalized. The share of foreign equity participation was increased, and many activities in many activities what they did is 100% foreign direct investments were permitted. So it became easy for the foreigners to come to India and invest in India. So apart from that, the fifth one was automatic permission was granted for technology agreements with foreign companies. So the people who wanted the technology of foreign countries, so those organizations were given with automatic permission to carry out their activity, that is to carry out the agreement with foreign companies. So the last feature of this was Foreign Investment Promotion Board, that is FIPB, was set up to promote and channelize foreign investment in India. So not only this, these are the main features. So apart from this, you have many other aspects which comes under this particular point. Okay, so these are the main features which we can say. So what happened is, like, the appropriate measures were taken to remove the obstacles in the way of growth and expansion, so that the growth and expansion of the country can be increased to a greatest extent. So under this we had, like I told you, you had liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So liberalization, or liberalization, the policy sought to liberate industry from shackles of licensing system, then drastically reducing the role of public sector, that is privatization, and encourage foreign private participation in Indian industrial development, or India's industrial development, which is also called as globalization. So when coming to liberalization, so the economic reforms that was introduced were aimed at liberalizing the Indian business and industry from all unnecessary controls and restrictions. So liberalization is nothing but reducing the restrictions which totally was available before, okay, which was totally available before. So what it did is the economic reforms that were introduced were aimed at liberalizing the Indian business and also the industry from all unnecessary controls and restrictions. So all those unnecessary controls and restrictions were totally liberalized. So they they did is they signaled the end of the license permit quota raj. Yes, they signaled the end of license permit quota raj. So liberalization of India industry has taken certain steps, or what are the things which happened under liberalization. So what are the things, or what are the changes that took place after liberalization? The first one was abolishing licensing requirement in most of industries except a short list. So what they did is, earlier most of the industries wanted licenses in order to carry out their business. So now after liberalization, what they did is they abolished license requirement in most of industries. Yes, they abolished licensing requirement in most of the industries except a short list. So ಏನು ಶಾರ್ಟ್ ಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅಥವಾ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಆ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬಾಕಿ ಇರೋ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸ್ಗೆ ಅವರ ಲೈಸೆನ್ಸ್ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅನ್ನು ಟೋಟಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಅಬಾಲಿಷ್ ಅಥವಾ ಸ್ಟಾಪ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಸೊ ದೋಸ್ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸೇಷನ್ ನೋ ಮೋರ್ ರಿಕ್ವೈರ್ಸ್ ಎನಿ ಲೈಸೆನ್ಸ್ ಟು ಕ್ಯಾರಿ ಔಟ್ ದರ್ business or carry out their productional activity. So the second one was freedom in deciding the scale of business activities. There is no restrictions on expansion or contraction of business organization. So the person or a business entrepreneur had that freedom in deciding the scale of business what activity. So whether is going to what expand the business organization or contract the business organization, or contraction of business activity. So it may be anything. There were no restriction. ಅವರ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ದೊಡ್ಡದು ಮಾಡೋದಾಗ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ಸಣ್ಣದು ಮಾಡೋದಾಗ್ಲಿ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವುದೇ restriction ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. The person who is a business entrepreneur had total freedom in deciding the scale of business activity. The third one was removal of restrictions on the movement of goods and services. So earlier there were certain restrictions when coming to movement of goods and services. So that particular what restrictions was totally reduced, or it was totally what stopped, or it was totally removed. So there was a removal of restrictions on the movement of goods and services. So the fourth one was freedom in fixing the prices of goods service, that is goods and services. So the person who is the entrepreneur or a business concern had the person who is a business concern or an entrepreneur had all the right, or was given all the right to fix the prices for the goods and services. That is freedom in fixing the price of goods and services. The person who is an entrepreneur or a business concern or a producer was given all the freedom to fix the price for goods and services. So this was a major what change that took place in liberalization. So it helped most of the entrepreneurs to a greatest extent. So apart from this, what they did is like the fifth one was like the reduction in tax rates and lifting the unnecessary controls over the economy. So what they did is, earlier the tax on these things were relatively very high. So what they did is they reduced the tax rate and it lifted unnecessary control. So the tax rate on these production and other activities were totally reduced. That is reduction in tax rate. The tax rate was totally reduced. So you can find what liberalizing. First one was like the licensing requirement was abolished. ಸೊ ಲೈಸೆನ್ಸಿಂಗ್ ಏನಿತ್ತು ಆ ಶಾರ್ಟ್ ಲಿಸ್ಟಲ್ಲಿರೋ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರೀಸನ್ನು ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬೇರೆಯವರಿಗೆ ಲೈಸೆನ್ಸಿಂಗ್ ಕಂಪಲ್ಸರಿ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಸೊ ಅಲ್ಲೇನಾಯಿತು, ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಲೈಸೆನ್ಸ್ ಬೇಕಿತ್ತು, ಕಂಪಲ್ಸರಿ ಬೇಕಿತ್ತು, ಇವಾಗ ಅದು ಬೇಕು ಅಂತಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಲಿಬರಲೈಸ್ ಅಥವಾ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ರಿಲ್ಯಾಕ್ಸೇಷನ್ ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ. ಎಸ್ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಒನ್ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಫ್ರೀಡಮ್ ಇನ್ ಡಿಸೈಡಿಂಗ್ ದಿ ಸ್ಕೇಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಆಕ್ಟಿವಿಟೀಸ್. ಸೊ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಏನು ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಆಕ್ಟಿವಿಟೀಸನ್ನು ಕ್ಯಾರಿ ಔಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ ಅದರ ಸ್ಕೇಲ್. ಸೊ ವೆದರ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಅ ಲಾರ್ಜ್ ಸ್ಕೇಲ್ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸೇಷನ್ ಆರ್ ಸ್ಮಾಲ್ ಸ್ಕೇಲ್ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸೇಷನ್. ಸೊ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ಸನ್ನು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರೋ ಅಥವಾ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ಸನ್ನು ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಷನ್ಗೆ ತರ್ತಿರೋ ಅದು ನಿಮಗೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದು. ಸೊ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಟೇಕ್ ಎನಿ ಕೈಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಡಿಸಿಷನ್ ವಿತ್ ರಿಲೇಟೆಡ್ ಟು ದಿಸ್. ಓಕೆ, ದ Third one was, like I told you, the removal of restrictions on the movement of goods and services. ಮೊದಲು ಏನಿತ್ತು, ಏನು ಮೂವ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಗೂಡ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಸರ್ವಿಸಸ್ ಇದೆ, ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ರೂಲ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ರೆಗ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಇತ್ತು, ರೆಸ್ಟ್ರಿಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಇತ್ತು, ವಿಚ್ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಟೇಕನ್ ಇನ್ ಟು ಕನ್ಸಿಡರೇಷನ್. ಬಟ್ ನೌ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಲೈಕ್ ದೋಸ್ restrictions are being totally removed, so it becomes easy for a business concern to move the goods or to carry the goods from one place to another. Okay, the fourth one was the freedom in fixing the price. The person who is an entrepreneur or a producer had all the right or freedom to fix the price for his goods and services. So ಅವನ ಪ್ರೈಸ್ ಏನಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಫಿಕ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಅವನಿಗೆ ರೈಟ್ಸ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟರು. ಸೊ ಏನಾಯಿತು, ಅದು ಇನ್ನೂ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಈಸಿ ಆಯಿತು ಅವರಿಗೆ. ಓಕೆ, ದ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಒನ್ ವಾಸ್ ಲೈಕ್ ಫಿಫ್ತ್ ಒನ್ which I was explaining now, reduction in tax rate. ಸೊ ಮೊದಲು ತುಂಬ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸನ್ನು ಪೇ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಿತ್ತು, ಸೊ ಅದು ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಯ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಇವಾಗ ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, ದೇ ಟೋಟಲಿ ರೆಡ್ಯೂಸ್ಡ್ ದಿ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ರೇಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಲಿಫ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ಅನ್ನೆಸೆಸರಿ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ಸ್ ಓವರ್ ದಿ ಎಕನಾಮಿ. ರಿಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಇನ್ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ರೇಟ್ಸ್, ಟೋಟಲಿ ದಿ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ರೇಟ್ಸ್ ವೇರ್ reduced and the lifting of unnecessary controls over the economy. Lifting of unnecessary control over the economy was made. So the unnecessary controls were totally abolished, or it was totally eliminated. So the sixth one was simplifying procedures for exports and imports. Yes, simplifying the procedures for export and import. So export and import has very less amount of rules and regulations. So what they did is they totally simplified the rules and regulation. They totally simplified the rules and regulation. So when it comes to export and import, they totally simplified. They made the export and import very easy or convenient for the producer to produce or to make export of their goods which are produced by them. Okay, the last one under the liberalization was making it easier to attract foreign capital, and that is it says that all this what changes in liberalization or under liberalization made it easier to attract foreign capital and technology to India. So when the rules and regulations were totally liberalized, liberalized, what happened is like it made the foreign investors, to invest in India. That is foreign capital and technology. It attracted the foreign capital as well as the technology into India. Okay, so the second one is privatization. We will go to the privatization. So what is this privatization? So when coming to liberalization, we learned that the liberalizing of activities of under Indian business and industry, yes, from all unnecessary controls and restrictions were done. That is taking out all the things which are totally unnecessary. So unnecessary controls were totally eliminated when it came to liberalization. So what are the things that happens under privatization? So when coming to privatization, the new set of economic reforms, what it did is it aimed at giving greater role to private sector. It aimed at giving greater role to private sector. It aimed at giving greater role to private sector in the nation building process. Okay, so when the greater role is given to the private sector, obviously what happens is it reduces the role of the public sector. It reduces the role of public sector. So this was a reversal of the development strategy pursued so far by Indian planners. So it was a reversal of the development strategy pursued so far by Indian planners. So to achieve this, what the government did is it refined the role of public sector. It refined the role of public sector in the new industrial policy of 1991. Yes, so privatization, what it did is it reduced the role of public sector and those roles were transferred to private sector. That is, the work of private sector were increased and the work of public sector were totally reduced. So for this, what the government did is the government refined the role of public sector in the new economic or new industrial reforms of 1991. Okay, so this the new economic reforms or new industrial reforms of 1991. It adopted the policy of planned disinvestment, it adopted policy of planned disinvestment of the public sector and decided to refer the loss making and sick enterprises. Adopted the policy of planned disinvestment of the public sector. Adopted the policy of planned disinvestment of the public sector. And what it did is it decided to refer the loss making and sick enterprises to the Board of Industrial and Financial Reconstruction, that is BIFR. Yes, Board of Industrial and Financial Reconstruction. So the team of disinvestments, what they did is they used here means transfer of public sector enterprises to the private sector. So they totally transferred the public sector enterprises, that is totally transferred the control of public sector enterprises to private sector. They totally transferred the public sector enterprises to private sector. Okay, so what happens when business organization has majority of shares, or when organization's majority share is with the government? When the organization's majority share is with government, that is more than 50% or not less than 50%, 51% of share is with the government. When the government has majority share ಅಂದ್ರೆ 51% ಕಿಂತ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಅಥವಾ 51 ಅಥವಾ ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಶೇರ್ಸ್ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಹತ್ರ ಇರುವಾಗ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ದೇ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ ಆಸ್ ದಿ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಎಂಟರ್ಪ್ರೈಸ್. ಸೊ ಅವರನ್ನು ನಾವೇನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಎಂಟರ್ಪ್ರೈಸ್ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಟೋಟಲ್ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ, ಇಫ್ ದೇರ್ ಈಸ್ ಅ ಡೈಲ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಓನರ್ಶಿಪ್ beyond 51%, yes, it will result in transfer of ownership and management of the enterprise to private sector. So ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದೆ ಯಾವಾಗ 51% ಕಿಂತ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಓನರ್ಶಿಪ್ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ದಾಗುತ್ತೆ, 51% ಅಥವಾ ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇದ್ರೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಅ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಕಂಪನಿ. ಎಸ್, ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಅ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಕಂಪನಿ. ಯಾವಾಗ ಅವರ ಏನು ಆಕ್ಟಿವಿಟಿ ಇದೆ ಅಥವಾ ಅವರ ಶೇರ್ಸ್ ಇದೆ, ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಶೇರ್ಸ್ 51%ಗಿಂತ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಗುವಾಗ, ಅಂದರೆ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಗಿಂತ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮೆಜಾರಿಟಿ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಆಗುವಾಗ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ದ ಓನರ್ಶಿಪ್ ವಿಲ್ ಗೆಟ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ಡ್, ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ದ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಗೆಟ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ಡ್ ಟು ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟರ್. ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟುಡ್? ಸೊ if there is a dilution of government ownership beyond 90, that is 51%, beyond 51%, ಯಾವಾಗ 51% ಕಿಂತ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಶೇರ್ಸ್ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅವಾಗ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಓನರ್ಶಿಪ್ ಗೆಟ್ಸ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ಡ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಟು ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟರ್. ಸೊ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟಿಂದ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟರ್ಗೆ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ಟೋಟಲಿ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಪ್ರೈವೇಟೈಸೇಷನ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟಿಂದ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟಿಗೆ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಥವಾ ಪ್ರೈವೇಟ್ ಸೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ. ಓಕೆ, ದ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಒನ್ ಇಸ್ globalization. So when coming to globalization means the integration of the various economies of the world, that is getting together all, that is various economies of the world, is leading towards the emergence of cohesive global economy. So it is nothing but integration of various economies of the world. Yes, so till 1991 what the government did is, the government of India had followed a policy of strictly regulating import in the value of volume terms. So before 1991 the government of India, what it did is it had followed a policy of strictly regulating imports in the value of volume terms, So these regulations were with respect of licensing of imports maybe, or tariff restrictions or quantitative restrictions or all these things. Okay, so these regulations were in respect of licensing of import, tariff restriction and quantitative restriction. So the new economic reforms, what it did is it aimed at a trade liberalization. The new economic reform, it aimed at trade liberalization, export promotion through rationalization, trade liberalization, trade liberalization, directed towards import liberalization, Yes, so the new economic reforms aimed at trade liberalization were direct towards import liberalization, export promotion through rationalization of tariff structure, and reforms with respect to foreign exchange. Reforms with respect to foreign exchange. So the reason was that so that the country does not remain isolated from the rest of the world. So when the country it mingles or when it carries out its business with the other countries, that is remaining countries of the world. Yeah, so what happens, it does not remain isolated, ಅದು ಯಾವುದೇ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೆ ಸಪ್ರೇಟ್ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ವೈ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಕ್ಯಾರೀಸ್ ಔಟ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಆಕ್ಟಿವಿಟೀಸ್ ವಿತ್ ದಿ ಅದರ್ ಕಂಟ್ರೀಸ್. ಬೇರೆ ಆಕ್ಟಿವಿಟೀಸ್ ಅಥವಾ ಬೇರೆ ಕಂಟ್ರಿ ಜೊತೆ ಆಕ್ಟಿವಿಟೀಸನ್ನು ಕ್ಯಾರಿ ಔಟ್ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ದ ಕಂಟ್ರಿ ಡಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ರಿಮೇನ್ ಐಸೋಲೇಟೆಡ್. ಎಸ್, ಸೊ ದ ನ್ಯೂ ಎಕನಾಮಿಕ್ ರಿಫಾರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಏಮ್ಡ್ ಅಟ್ ಟ್ರೇಡ್ ಲಿಬರಲೈಸೇಷನ್. ದ ನ್ಯೂ economic reforms aimed at trade liberalization were directed towards import liberalization. Yes, so ಟ್ರೇಡ್ ಲಿಬರಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದು ಅದನ್ನ ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, ಇಂಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಲಿಬರಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ತಂದರು. ಸೊ ದೆರ್ ವಾಸ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಪ್ರಮೋಷನ್ ಥ್ರೂ ರ್ಯಾಷನಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಟ್ಯಾರಿಫ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಚರ್. ಎಸ್, ದೆರ್ ವಾಸ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಪ್ರಮೋಷನ್ ಥ್ರೂ ರ್ಯಾಷನಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ tariff structure, and reforms with respect to foreign exchange, and reforms in respect to foreign exchange. So what happened is like the country it does not remain isolated from the rest of the world. So what globalization does is globalization involves an increased level of interaction and interdependence from the various nations of the global economy. Globalization involves an increased level of interaction. So it totally increases the level of interaction. It totally increases the level of interaction and interdependence among various nations of the global economy. Interdependence among various nations of global economy. So physical geographical gap or the political boundaries no longer remained as a barriers for the business enterprises to serve the customer. So when globalization was introduced, what happened is like the physical geographical gap or the political boundaries, it was not at all a barrier for the business enterprise, or it was not at all the limitation for a business organization to serve the customer. Why? Because the customers are in distant geographical market. So when the customers are all over the globe, that is distant geographical market, with the help of globalization, the physical geographical gap and political boundaries no longer remained as barrier for business enterprise to serve the customer. So this has been made possibly by a rapid advancement in technology and liberal trade policies by government. So this was made possibly by rapid advancement in technology and liberal trade policies by government by government. So through the policy of 1991, the government of India moved the country to the globalization pattern. The government of India moved the country to globalization pattern. So it's very easy now. So globalization ಅನ್ನುವಾಗ just carrying out your business activities globally. Yes, so you just opening your market to the other people, that is other foreign investors. So what they do is like they come to our country and invest in our country. We also can go out and invest in the other country. So what happens, there is an increased level of interaction. And interdependence among the various nations of the global economy. There is increased level of interaction. So you interact with the people of the other country. So it increases the level of interaction and interdependence among the various nations of the global economy. So physical geographical gap or political boundaries was not at all a barrier for business enterprise to serve the customer who are in the distant geographical market. So it was not at all a barrier. After globalization, as the level of interaction totally increased. Yes, okay, among the various nation of global economy, as the interaction level totally increased among the various nations of the global economy, that helped, or it says that physical geographical gap or political boundaries was no longer a barrier for business enterprise to serve a customer in a distant geographical market. Okay, so this was possible, it says it was possible only by rapid advancement of technology and liberal trade policies which was taken by the government. So these were the changes which the industrial reforms of 1991 in India made. Okay, so these were the changes of the 1991's industrial policy or economic reforms in which took place in India. So there were lots of difference. So before 1991's industrial policy, like I told you, the country came across the financial crisis, that is foreign exchange crisis maybe, or government deficit. Yes, so in order to come out of this particular problem, the government, that is government brought this liberalization, privatization and globalization into practice.